We all love technology, don't we? We love the newest gadget, the newest productivity tools coming out, the latest smartphone. Well, I certainly do. I started my first online marketing agency when I was still in high school. Well, online marketing agency. Back then, we built websites for plumbers, for electricians, for doctors. Back then means 20 years ago. Back then, NASPER was still a thing, and modems still made funny noises when they connected to the internet. And I wanted to make some party money. Back then, I was still going to parties. But today, we look at our smartphones every day. We look at technology every day. In fact, just last week, I was in Berlin. I was walking along at the main station, checking the latest social media updates, checking my latest notifications, and not looking and not being aware of the world around me. And what happened? Well, I tripped, I face-planted in the middle of the Berlin main station. I was so unaware of my surroundings, I was so focused on technology that I didn't really realize what was going on around me. And it feels a bit that's been what happened to us in the last couple of years. In fact, in the last 20 years, most of business, most of industries were focused on the fourth industrial revolution, on the new adventure of new technology, of digital media, of businesses disrupting businesses, of startups coming out. So many companies have left the Fortune 500 or the German DAX being disrupted by startups, that startups become both the threat to every manager, the horror of every manager, but as well as the promise of being more agile, being more innovative, being more thoughtful about the things. So we also see that Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google, they dominate entire economies by now. They dominate our lives. And in Germany, we also see more and more startups coming up. And it's great to see because many, many entrepreneurs are taking the risk in a very engineer-driven environment like Germany. There were many more entrepreneurs taking the risk to build up new startups, to build up new solutions. We've become better and better, not good enough yet, at supporting these startups, to build the next future German Mittelstand. So let's take a look at this new German Mittelstand and what it looks like today. The EY startup study looked at the top 100 startups in Germany based on their funding received until 2018. So far, the top 100 got 8.1 billion euros in funding, and the top 10 that you can see here in this slide, they alone got 3.3 billion euros in funding. That's great news. In the past, actually, access to funding was a main obstacle to German startups. But let's look at these startups a bit more closely. Those are the top 10. Those are the most funded startups, again. If you look in the middle of the circle, when you think about it, all of those startups are looking at how can we actually drive more consumerism. How can we get people to buy more? How can we drive e-commerce? How can we buy the next consumption wave? When you look at the fintechs in the upper left corner, it's the same thing. How can we actually get more credit to consumers so they can buy more? We have more innovation in fintech. We have more easy transactions that ultimately are linked and focused on how can we actually buy more. There's one company in the top 10, Sonnen, that's actually looking at the problem, how do we transform our economy to a solar power, to a renewable energy powered economy. Now, this is not to say that there's not a lot of sweat and tears going into these ventures. There's a lot of really good brain capital going into it, a lot of good passion actually driving those ventures. And in fact, I love data, so I looked at what are those founders' backgrounds. So the brains of the top 10 founders, not even counting their staff, include 17 bachelors, include 11 masters, and 2 PhDs. Just the top 10 founders. Now, you may dispute whether there's a direct correlation between a university degree and intelligence. My teachers certainly would. But at the same time, it's really clear what happens here. There's a lot of talent going into these startups, a lot of talent into this kind of innovation. What if we could turn this around? What if we could turn it around from a consumerism-focused startup environment to an actual environment that's solving real and pressing challenges? Just imagine these kind of brains, these kind of entrepreneurial passion going into solving real massive challenges that we're facing today. When we look at this, we need to talk about it. This year, the house was on fire, both literally and not literally. The Arctic was on fire in amounts, in vast areas that it has never been before. In Germany, it wasn't really featured a lot in the news, but it has been burning in areas, in a scope of areas that it has never before. When you look at the UN emission gap report, it says that even if all the political and environmental and economic pledges of politicians, but also economists, CEOs, are being kept, even then, we're still 13 gigatons of CO2 equivalent away from our 2-degree goal. 13 gigatons. That's 3 times the European emissions of CO2, the annual emissions of CO2 in the EU. But what the emission report also says is that innovation can actually drive our progress towards achieving the 2-degree goal. So we need to look at how can we actually drive this innovation. Similarly, when we look at social challenges, the world has given itself 17 amazing goals to reduce inequality, to end hunger, to end poverty. There's lots of energy and work going into solving these issues. But the World Economic Forum also estimates that we need $3.9 trillion per year to solve these problems. Good news is we have $1.4 trillion. Challenge is, how do we get the other 2.5? Now, to some extent, we have all been looking at our smartphones, checking social media while being unaware of the world around us. So how do we change this? How do we build solutions that actually solve the challenges we're facing today? I want to introduce you to something. Naveen Krishna is an inspiring founder in India. He's one of the entrepreneurs that we had the chance of working with Yunus Social Business, and we've just invested into his company called SMV Green. SMV Green is an amazing example of how you can combine business acumen, business skills, with actually solving social or environmental issues. SMV Green produces electric rickshaws. It brings electric mobility, sustainable mobility to India. Now, whoever has been to India knows that the first thing you will see when you exit the airport in India is a rickshaw. There's many of them around. In fact, if you don't see one the minute after you step off the airport, I would check whether you're in the right country. But you also know there is pollution everywhere. Cities are blocked by traffic jams and blocked by pollution. So an electric rickshaw is an amazing idea. But not only that, he went one step further. He developed a system called lease to own. He wanted to get the poorest to get a chance to earn their income. So with a little small fee, he's actually giving out these rickshaws on a monthly basis to the poorest so they can earn an income through taxi rides, through rickshaw rides. The poorest driving electric rickshaws in India. After 24 months, they own the rickshaw and can even earn more income. And so far, he's quadrupling their income. 4x. It's an amazing story, and it even gets better because he's developed a program that's focusing on women entrepreneurs, on women that are driving the rickshaws. Again, if you know India, it's predominantly male-dominated, it's very, very male culture, and women don't really have a voice and a place in the society that they should have. With this, he's turning everything upside down. He's turning upside down that you can't do sustainable mobility in communities that can't even afford their monthly payments, and that you can't get women into entrepreneurship. It's an amazing example of how you can combine business with solving social or environmental problems. And it doesn't just start with entrepreneurs like Naveen. We at Yunus Social Business, we look at the world in 2 ways. One, how can we drive social innovation through entrepreneurs like Naveen? But also, on the other hand, how do we get companies, multinational companies, to change their way of doing business? Today, we perceive companies to be at the root, at the main root of creating some of our problems, right? So how do we get them to change their way of doing business? How do we think about business as unusual? And it's becoming more important even for the corporates themselves. When you look at the statistics, 81% of millennials want the company to commit to social responsibility. It's a prerequisite, a necessity for your generation to actually work with these companies. And when you look at the number of young people that want to still work in a corporation, less than 25% want to do so after university. It's focused more on flexible work, on purposeful work. And there was another report that came out just recently, the Trust report, that looked at the brand Made in Germany. Are we still trusted as a country, as a nation in the world that was in the past stood for quality and for reliability? Unfortunately, less than 20% of people still trust German CEOs to do the right thing. This number is much higher in other countries. We've come to a point where we do not trust corporate players. We mistrust them. So how can we change that perspective? How can we use the resources, the assets that these companies actually bring with them to solve problems, not to create them? We think that the next wave after the digital disruption will be the purpose disruption. We think that companies that do not clearly know what their purpose is, why they're here to exist, will not survive this next wave. When you look at the news, you look at Larry Fink, the BlackRock CEO, one of the biggest PE funds in the world, saying that they're not going to invest into companies anymore that don't take their responsibility serious. When you look at Ray Dalio, that actually went one step further, he's one of the most known hedge fund investors in the world. He actually said that capitalism in its current form is one of the biggest threats to human society. A hedge fund manager. And just this year, the Business Roundtable, a vastly industry-dominated forum in the US, has signed a petition of 181 CEOs to move away from a shareholder value-only focused principles to a full stakeholder model. So times are changing. They may not be changing quick enough. But we're getting to the next stage of getting people ready. But how can we put more into this? How can we make it more than just an announcement, just signing a letter, getting people into action? Let me give you another example. Together with a German family company, we've looked at how can we actually get plastics off the streets. Now, this company produces household products based on plastics. In the past, they were super proud of their business model because they were producing purposeful products. But now, with all the challenges growing around ocean-bound plastics, they had to reinvent their entire business model. So they've committed themselves towards creating a circular supply chain, a fully circular supply chain. But they want to go one step further and take action. And that's where we're now starting a recycling plant with them in India. This recycling plant is buying from waste pickers in India, buying plastics that they collect. Now again, they are at the lowest strata of society. There are women working on waste dumps like this, working under terrible conditions and having no chance of escaping poverty. Because of this German family company, they can guarantee supply and demand. They can actually drive volumes that secures a stable income to these waste pickers. And more than that, they will provide healthcare and educational services to the waste pickers to lift them out of poverty at least in one generation's time. The plastic is recycled into the company's value chain and thereby starts to create the first circular loop of their entire value chain. And they went even one step further and made it a true social business, which means they invested the money, they know they can take that investment back, but beyond that, every profit is reinvested to create more impact and get more waste pickers out of poverty. So it's a way for them to show we want to do things differently. We don't just want to talk about it, we want to do things differently. And this is where we want to get. If you look at culture, if you look at mindset of what drives our behavior, there's this Edgar Schein's, this culture pyramid, where at the bottom is what we believe, the things we believe are to be true. Let's say companies are there to create shareholder value. Then there are values and attitudes that build on top of it, and what we can see, what people do, that's actually just the top of the iceberg. Now, in the past, we've said, well, we can actually think ourselves into a new way of acting. We can build new strategies, we can design nice slides, we can create a call to action, and sometime, at some point in the future, there's actually somebody that's going to take action. Well, we don't have that time anymore. We need to act today. And this is why we truly believe that we can act ourselves into a new way of thinking. When we work with our clients, when we work with the social entrepreneurs, when they do things differently, they start to see the world differently. They start to think about problems in a way that it creates opportunity to solve them. And not just through a donation-based model that may work in some aspects, but then also through a sustainable business model. So when we look at audiences like this, at students that are just starting their careers, we really want to look at how can you use your potential, how can you use your acumen in business and finance to actually drive change in the world that we need. We think social is the new digital. We think that we have to look behind the social fiction that is driving our science fiction at the moment. Seeing a lot of technological advances in the world, now it's time to build a social utopia by action that we take. Thank you.
Thank